Hi, everyone. It is a delight to be having my morning coffee with prolific author Barbara Dee. Barbara, welcome to Words, Images, and Worlds. Thank you for jumping in.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. I was excited to have this conversation. I know that you've written, I believe, 14 middle grade novels, among them Violets Are Blue and Maybe He Just Likes You. And you have a current release, which I'll hold up here. Unstuck there. That looks better than my face. Absolutely. There's Unstuck right there. Which is just a beautiful book and wonderfully written. And so glad to be talking with you today and talking about writing.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be talking to kids about Unstuck, especially because it was sort of inspired by a number of conversations I've had with kids about writing.
Oh, wonderful.
When I visit schools, kids always ask me, "How do you deal with writer's block?" And they also send me emails um, saying things like, "I'm writing a novel, and it's going to be a whole series. But I'm stuck on page 6. Do you have any advice?"
Yeah.
So I thought, because I was being asked this question so frequently by kids, I should put my answer in a book. And that's basically what Unstuck is. It's a novel, it's got other things going on in it, but it's also a response to that question.
Such a timely, wonderful topic, and I love how writing allows people to explore ideas. I teach a writing class at the high school level right now, and that was one of the first questions we had this semester. How do you deal
Really?
with writer's block? What do you do? Yeah.
I think some of it is that kids have this idea of writers is, sitting at their computer and struggling. It's sort of this romantic picture, waiting,
Mm-hmm.
this vision of an author waiting for the lightning bolt of inspiration. Um, but also, I think kids genuinely struggle with writing anxiety, especially, I think, kids who are the most voracious readers, the kids who think that they have to produce this series or this huge tome or, Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they pressure themselves. And so part of what the book Unstuck is about is getting kids to think in smaller terms and in more personal ways about what they're writing and connect to their book in a more intimate way instead of having these, grand notions about what they have to produce.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. To take it back to your writer origins, what connected you with writing and the written word?
I always wrote. I was writing when I was 5 years old. I have a picture of my very first book on my website. Um, and when people would say to me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would say an authoress, because I
Mm,
thought that if you were a girl, you had to be an authoress and not an author.
I like
Um,
that.
so
May I
I
title
was,
the episode Authoress Barbara D? Is that okay?
please do not.
Okay, okay. I will not then.
But I was always writing. I wrote um, poetry in middle school, and I kept a journal, and it was just always something that I did. And I was a high school English teacher at one point, and then I went to law school, and I was on the law review, and I was always writing. I practiced law for a few years. I wrote briefs. Um, but I always had this idea that I wanted to see if I could get published. And I have 3 kids. When my youngest kid was old enough for full day of school, I thought, okay, here's my chance. The house is quiet for a few hours. Let me see if I can write something that will get me published. If not, I'll go back to teaching or being a lawyer, or I'll think of something else. But I sort of owe it to myself to sort of see this dream through a little bit. So
Hmm.
I
hmm
wrote a manuscript. It got sent around. I got some very lovely rejection letters that were substantive, so they were encouraging. I wrote another manuscript, and that became my first published book.
Love that. Yeah, yeah. You mentioned something that's just a common feature there, other than writer's block, and that is rejection. Um, I don't think you can be a writer and not experience. I don't think you could be a human and not experience rejection in some way, but it tends to be formalized with writers.
Well, what I tell kids is that to be a writer, you have to be two. contradictory things. You have to be a very, very sensitive person because you have to be able to understand how people think and how people feel. You have
Hmm.
to be very in touch with your emotions and with other people's emotions. At the same time, you have to be very tough because you're going to experience a lot of rejection. And then once your book is published, you're going to experience a lot of criticism. So
Hmm.
that combination of sensitivity and toughness is sometimes hard to make, hard to balance, but you need it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's a gifted mix for sure. Um, what are the benefits, the challenges of writing, especially for young people?
Well, the main challenge is getting the voice right.
Hmm.
You have to write with a kid's sensibility, even if you're not writing in the first person. If you're writing middle grade, you have to write with a kid's sensibility and with that kid's voice. And that's something that's hard for some adult writers to do.
Hmm.
You also have to respect kids and understand that they have access to more information than we had when we were kids. And some of that information is very troubling to them. It causes anxiety. It's hard for them to process. They're barraged with information all
Hmm.
day long.
Hmm.
And we live in a very complicated world right now. So just because kids aren't talking about these things, it doesn't mean that they're not processing these things. And you have to acknowledge, I think you have to acknowledge their feelings about these subjects and validate them. That's partly why I write what I write. I also think kids need entertainment.
Yes, yeah.
So I try to infuse my books with as much humor as possible, even when I'm tackling tough topics. And I also always incorporate other threads. So I'm not just writing about topic A or topic B. I'm also always writing about friendship issues and school issues and family issues because, kids' lives are not just about one thing all day long, you
Yeah,
know. So I think that makes for a richer canvas when you're writing.
well said, very well said. Well, your book is a book for young people about a young person who is writing. And so I'm wondering about how the process sort of unfolded for the book as you were working on it.
What I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Sort of like how you went about telling the story and what you kept in mind, I guess would be the direction I'm going.
Well, I could have just written a book that was just a how-to,
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
nonfiction book. Here's what to do if you are stuck in your writing. But I thought it would be more accessible for kids if I incorporated a lot of the strategies that I suggest about writing in a novel. So, um, one of the things I had to do for this book was to read a lot of the books that the main character would have read. And I
Hmm.
don't typically read fantasy fiction. My thing is more realistic fiction, but this character was steeped in fantasy fiction. So I spent a few months just reading a whole bunch of books that I loved. I wouldn't have read otherwise. And I incorporate a lot of those tropes in the book.
Yeah.
So you can see what she's writing. It has to sound like the kind of thing that a kid who read a lot of those books would have written because that's what she read. Um, so that was a lot of fun. And while I was doing that, I was also incorporating all this writing advice.
Hmm.
So it was complicated in that way, but it was a lot of fun to write. Ironically, I didn't struggle with this book.
That is good. That is good. And on top of that, in the work that you do in it, you're writing from this young character's perspective. You're writing sort of along the lines of what she would write, and you're sort of helping her solve a mystery through writing related to a family member. I don't think I'm giving away anything with that at all. That's
Right,
beyond the book
right.
description. So there are a lot of interesting layers going on.
Well, one of the ways that she gets unstuck is by following her teacher's advice to write her feelings. And once she starts to make her fantasy novel a reflection of her real life, she becomes unstuck. It just sort of, she connects to it. And that's,
Yeah.
I think, in a lot of ways, like the most important advice that I'm giving in the book. It's that, you should feel a connection to your book. You shouldn't write from up here. You should write from here, your heart.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a book for readers in that way, and it's also a book for writers. So one other thing I appreciate about it is that you include advice, you include pieces of what you do as a writer to become unstuck.
But the thing that I want kids to know is that not every bit of advice is going to work for every writer. Not every
Mhm,
strategy works for every writer. You just have to figure out what works for you. And also to know that, writer's block is a very normal part of the writing process. Every writer goes through it to different degrees at different points in their writing.
mhm,
And there are many different strategies to try, but the most important thing I think for kids is that you should focus on the process of writing and enjoying writing, and not on this idea that you have to produce this series or this huge book or win an award or impress a certain person. Enjoy the writing.
mhm, mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. Um, Well, by means of I think I have only one or two final official questions, and certainly anything that we've missed that you'd like to mention, I would be glad to have you do that. Uh, any particular creative attention that you're exploring right now that you'd like to mention? And then if I'm a reader out there and I want to connect with you or find out more about Unstuck, where can I go to do that?
Well, my website is barbaradeebooks.com. And I hope you'll find me there, and you can email me at barbara@barbadeebooks.com. I'm currently revising my book that's out next February 2025. It's called Tear This Down, and it's about a kid who discovers that the most famous figure associated with her town, the namesake of her town, a 19th century thinker and editor and advisor to President Lincoln, a very important person in American history, did not believe women should vote.
Hmm.
So she she wants to take down his statue from the town square and replace it with the statue of a suffragette.
Nice,
So the
nice.
book is about women's rights and voting rights, and it's timely in that way.
Very much so, very much. I love how you're taking on ideas and helping kids see how barriers can be broken. That's really cool work. Really cool.
Oh, thank you. I'm
Yeah,
excited about that book.
yeah. Have we missed any advice for young readers out there, or any particular insights or comments that you'd like to add before we close out?
No, just that I hope I hear from people when they read Unstuck. It will be out February 27th. And I'd like to
Absolutely,
hear, from kids and adults who have experienced writer's block, what has helped them.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, I love that idea of if you're blocked in writing, it doesn't mean you're broken. Just keep writing, keep writing. So I appreciate your time, Barbara. Glad to have you back anytime. I appreciate your prolific work that continues, and I will hold this up one more time because it's lovely. Actually, the cover has a nice sort of texture to it too. I'll also add that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.